Welcome back to AllAboutRx. Today, we are exploring the ultimate command center, the structure of the nervous system and the brain. We're going to look at everything, starting with the central nervous system, comprising the brain and spinal cord, all the way out to the peripheral nervous system, consisting of 43 pairs of nerves, including 12 pairs of cranial nerves and 31 pairs of spinal nerves. We're going to break down exactly how your body is wired to perceive, process, and react to the world around you. Let's jump right in.
Here is our top-down anatomical syllabus for today's lecture. We'll start with a system organization overview, then explore the forebrain, move down into the hindbrain and brainstem, examine the spinal cord structure, and finally branch out into the peripheral network, so you'll know exactly what high-yield topics are coming your way. All right, let's jump right into Section 1. System Organization Overview. We'll be specifically looking at the split between the central and peripheral systems.
Think of this whole setup as a clear division of labor, kind of like your computer's main processor and the cables connecting it to your peripherals. You have the central nervous system comprising the brain and the spinal cord. This is your primary processing hardware. It's where all the high-level decision-making and integration actually happen. Then, spreading out from that core, we have the peripheral nervous system, which acts as the body's vast and intricate wiring network. Sensory input from your environment, like the feeling of a crisp breeze or touching a hot stove, flows in via the afferent division. Once the central processor decides what to do about that input, the motor output flows back out via the efferent division, sending commands to control everything from voluntary skeletal muscles to those crucial involuntary autonomic functions that keep you alive without you even having to think about it. Pretty amazing, right?
Moving right along to Section 2, Exploring the Forebrain. We're going to zoom in on the body's most sophisticated processing center and see how it goes from a simple tube into the complex cortex.
It's wild to think about, but during embryonic development, just 4 weeks in, the central nervous system is nothing more than a simple, long neural tube. Every thought, every memory you will ever have starts right there. But watch how it transforms. That anterior part rapidly folds and expands to form 3 primary regions, the forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. Over time, that top section, the forebrain, expands massively, folding over itself to become the adult cerebrum, which is eventually neatly divided into the frontal, parietal, occipital, and temporal lobes. This huge physical expansion is essentially the evolution of human consciousness, packing itself tightly into a confined space.
Let's break down the structure of that cerebrum a bit more. The outer shell is the cerebral cortex. Because it needs to fit inside the skull, it is highly folded into ridges and grooves, featuring a 3 mm thick, 6-layered cerebral cortex of gray matter. Just 3 millimeters. But this incredibly thin sheet is quite literally where your conscious perception, complex reasoning, and learning happen. It's what makes you, you. Beneath that cortex, we find the white matter tracts, which are essentially the heavily insulated, myelinated information superhighways carrying data to and from those gray matter processing centers. And deeper still, we have the subcortical basal nuclei, which are dense clusters of gray matter tightly involved in refining our movement and posture.
Nestled deep within the forebrain, you'll also find interconnected, fluid-filled cavities called the cerebral ventricles that physically support and cushion the brain. Wrapping around those central structures is a functional ring known as the limbic system, which includes the hippocampus and the amygdala. Think of this as the primal emotional core of the brain. It handles our deepest learning, visceral emotional experiences, and basic survival instincts. Here is a fascinating fact for you. If you've ever wondered why a specific smell can instantly trigger a vivid childhood memory, well, it's because your olfactory pathways route directly through this very limbic system, hardwiring scent straight to your emotional core.
Also within the forebrain is the diencephalon, which houses 3 absolutely vital structures. First up is the thalamus, which functions as a major sensory relay station, filtering and directing nearly all sensory information rushing up to the cortex. Then, sitting just below it, is the hypothalamus, operating as the master homeostatic command center for the entire body. Finally, we have the epithalamus, a small mass tucked away in the back, complete with its melatonin-releasing pineal gland, which quietly dictates your sleep-wake cycles and circadian rhythms.
To really lock this in for your exams, if you're ever sweating in a brutally hot room, feeling a sudden spike of hunger, or shivering in the cold, you have your hypothalamus to thank. Just remember a simple mnemonic. H is for homeostasis. The hypothalamus is the master homeostatic command center for hunger, hydration, heat regulation, hormones via the pituitary gland, and heart control. Basically, if a process keeps your body's internal environment in optimal balance, preventing you from crashing out of normal operating parameters, the hypothalamus is the invisible hand running the show.
Okay,
Shifting our focus down the anatomical chain, let's enter Section 3, the hindbrain and brainstem, the critical relays of the central nervous system.
Moving downward, we encounter a masterclass in motor coordination and survival, the hindbrain and brainstem. At the back sits the cerebellum, and here is a crucial distinction. The cerebellum coordinates balance and posture without initiating voluntary movement. Think of it like an airplane's co-pilot. It doesn't decide where the plane goes, but it constantly adjusts the flaps and thrusters to ensure the flight is perfectly smooth and stable. In front of it, we have the brainstem, encompassing the midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata. Every single neural signal passing between the forebrain, the cerebellum, and the spinal cord must travel through these tightly packed brainstem structures to relay signals and regulate vital autonomic functions, like your baseline cardiovascular and respiratory drive.
Buried deep within the core of that brainstem is a loosely arranged network of nuclei known as the life-essential reticular formation. To put this bluntly, this is the one part of the brain absolutely essential for life. It receives input from all sensory systems and projects throughout the entire cerebral cortex, regulating your sleep-wake cycle, global arousal, and cardiovascular control. If the cerebral cortex goes offline, a person might lose consciousness. But if the reticular formation gets severely damaged, the entire arousal system crashes, often resulting in an irreversible coma. It is the fundamental power switch for the entire brain. Let's descend further into Section 4 to examine the main information highway of the central nervous system, the spinal cord structure.
Imagine a slender cylinder of soft tissue, about the size of your little finger, carefully protected within the bony armor of your vertebral column. If you were to slice right through it, you would see a very distinct structure. In the very center lies the butterfly-shaped gray matter, heavily populated with interneurons and cell bodies that process localized reflexes. Surrounding that internal butterfly is the longitudinal white matter. These are the myelinated axon tracts running vertically, functioning as massive, high-speed cables carrying sensory data up to the brain and motor commands back down to the body.
The way information gets on and off this highway is brilliantly organized. It's essentially a strictly enforced one-way street system. We can perfectly map this by distinguishing how afferent sensory fibers enter through dorsal roots and efferent motor fibers exit via ventral roots. So if you touch something sharp, that sensory signal arrives exclusively through the back door, the dorsal root. Once the brain processes that pain and decides to pull your hand away, those motor commands leave strictly through the front door, the ventral root. Sensory always in the back, motor always out the front.
Which brings us to our final section, the peripheral network. Let's map how that spinal cord wires out to the rest of the body.
To connect this massive central processor to every single muscle, organ, and sensory receptor in your body, the peripheral nervous system relies on a very specific magical number, exactly 43 pairs of nerves. This entire communication network is composed of those 43 pairs of nerves, including 12 pairs of cranial nerves that emerge directly from the brainstem to service the head and neck, and 31 pairs of spinal nerves that emerge from the various segments of the spinal cord to cover the rest of the body. These are the physical cables connecting your thoughts and reactions to the physical world.
When we look at how those motor signals are actually delivered to their final destinations, we see two entirely different engineering approaches. We can clearly contrast the single neuron somatic division with the two-neuron autonomic chain. The somatic system, which controls your voluntary skeletal muscles, like when you decide to lift a coffee cup, uses one continuous, heavily myelinated axon going straight from the central nervous system directly to the muscle for lightning-fast execution. The autonomic system, however, handles involuntary subconscious tasks like heart rate and digestion. This system relies on a two-neuron chain. It sends a signal from the central nervous system to an intermediate relay station called an autonomic ganglion, where it synapses with a second neuron that completes the journey to the target organ. This extra relay step allows the body to diverge, integrate, and highly regulate those crucial background survival functions.
So, the next time you effortlessly catch a falling object or suddenly feel your heart race in a moment of excitement, ask yourself, which intricate pathway of your 43 nerve pairs, white matter tracts, and billions of highly specialized cortical neurons just fired in perfect symphony to make that happen? Thank you for tuning into this lecture. If you found this breakdown helpful, please make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment and share with your fellow students below with any questions or topics you want covered next. See you in the next explainer.